since I'm the mayor, and sometimes the buck stops at the mayor, and I take no joy in leveling criticism at this. My primary duty is to defend members of the council, and I think that this mistake, and it's not a small mistake, I think it's a large mistake, may improperly reflect on the due diligence that the council and our support staff gives to this election process. It's the clerk's job to run the election. That's one of his primary duties. And we have it here. This is in the both in the charter and in the ordinance, that the duties of the city clerk, number one, include attending the meetings of the council, maintaining a record of the proceedings, maintaining a record of the ordinances, be custodian of the city seal, administer oaths, and conduct the elections. This is a special case in which the city clerk is running for city council. I have been there many times, and I know that there are pressures, there are distractions, huge distractions when you are running for city council and at the same time trying to perform the duties of your job. It's my understanding that the clerk was given the opportunity to step aside as clerk to focus on his campaign, not to retire, not to quit, but to step aside, and that was refused. This is what happens when you don't give enough due diligence to this system. We're not just talking about the 12 candidates who have submitted papers. I know someone who spoke to me last week who said, I would have loved to run for city council, but I got a late start and there's no way I can make the December 3rd deadline to get my signatures and have them submitted. And that person had pretty much given up. That person is happens to be a union member of Unite 11. She is a bar manager at the Glendale Hilton. And due to perhaps mistakes on her part, she got started late. And she said, there's no way I can meet that Tuesday deadline. But now we're saying that it's not the Tuesday deadline, it's the Friday deadline. And if you talk about disenfranchising people, we're not just disenfranchising voters, we're disenfranchising candidates. And I'm not sure that this person carries the same vision for the city that I do. I'm not sure I would have voted for this person, but she sure as heck should have had a chance to know when the true deadline was and collect her signatures and do that. The problem in our system is that the city clerk is an independently elected official, as is the city treasurer, as are the city council members. We cannot tell the city clerk what to do or how to do his job. Am I correct in that, Ms. Beers? I can't tell Mr. Kasakian what to do. I can't tell him to focus on your job or don't run for an elected office. Focus on your job, don't run for elected office. He's independent. I think that's an inherent issue that we have, is that he's on his own out there, whether he needs assistance, whether he doesn't need assistance. It's nothing that we have the purview over. So I'm not happy about this. I'm not happy about the article that was written by our local City Hall reporter, which paints over this as though it was just a clerical error. This is something that we knew about not just a year ago, we knew 2 years ago when we were resetting these election dates. There have been other oversights by the clerk's department. We had a school board candidate who was given the wrong date again several years ago. She had to sue the city, and we had to incur defense costs, not just our defense costs. We had to pay her defense costs so her name would be put on the ballot. It's just I don't think it's a minor thing, Mr. Mulhill, and I'm not running for re-election or a candidate. So, Mr. Mulhill, that's what I think. It's a significant issue. This is I think we may be the laughingstock of the neighboring cities that we haven't been able to get our act together. I'm not happy about it. I think this reflects more on the city council than it does on the city clerk, because people don't know, that the city clerk does that. Like I said, the buck stops up here with all of us. I wish we had, I wish there was someone else in the clerk's office attending to these issues, because as I said, it's not easy to do that. It's not an easy thing to do, to run for council, to run for any office, and run an election and deal with these dates and everything else here. So I'm not happy with this whole situation. I don't think any of us are coming out winners. I think we all are going to walk away with this with some mud on our faces, and that's, I think everyone concerned. Those are my comments for now. Anyone else have any comments?
Before the clerk, so this ordinance tonight will put us back into the normal, let's call it the old dates and so forth, but it actually extends it by 3 to 4 days?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, correct. So the ordinance before you that would be introduced tonight and come back to you next week for adoption would amend the municipal code to set to be silent as to the nomination period, so then it would follow the state law and the county's process by default. And so then, as a result, then it would also be subject to the November 12th through December 6th date. There's a separate provision of this ordinance also which would specifically address the nomination period that we're in, since the nomination period will close before this ordinance is effective, making very clear that the nomination period of November 12th through December 6th is the controlling period pursuant to the county's process.
So all of the candidates actually have a few extra days to get their signature in.
Correct.
Now, 2 years from now, the cycle will return to the county cycle, for lack of a better.
It will be the county cycle, correct?
Right, it'll be the county cycle. Okay.
Any other comments?
Okay.
Have you endorsed anyone, though? That seems to be the big issue here.
No.
Go ahead. You have the floor, Mr. Agajanian.
I'm glad this is discovered. It's unfortunate that this discovered so late. I have problem with it, of course, in the process. Why we shouldn't pay attention? This was going on since October of 2018. And here we have election pretty soon, and nomination process, the date is going to be closed for the candidates. And now of course it's our responsibility to appropriately allow the election process to go forward. But I'm still wonder what will happen. For different issues, people, they come forward and sue the city or anybody because of this mistake. How we know that somebody is not going to come up with some ideas and stop this process? Maybe I have to ask our city attorney. What's how you can assure us that this is going to go ahead appropriately?
Certainly, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Agajanian. Of all the options, this is clearly the best one that we could see, working with our staff, looking at it with the City Mayor's office and the City Clerk's office. In any process, any challenge to an election process, you have to show, one, that there's some process that's improper, and that, two, it was prejudicial to candidates or potential candidates. And so as the process that we have is the earliest election notices announcing this election had a nomination period of November 12th through December 6th. In our view, be very difficult, extremely difficult, and I can't really see an avenue for somebody to show that they were prejudiced by the fact that our code has a different period, especially given the fact that we are legalizing it, we are identifying the issue and correcting it as a matter of law, and the extent there's any inconsistency between the code and the nomination period that we're using, that will be fixed by this ordinance. So that's, is 100% guaranteed? No, but this is by far the best option before you, certainly to doing nothing.
I mean, I would like to allow this process to go forward, but I'm not happy with what happened, because we had this since October of 2018. Why we came to the today is December 3rd, and this is the closing date. And now we are saying this closing date is extended to December 6th, right?
Correct.
After 1 year and 13 months later, we come to correct this. In my opinion, this is unbelievable. City clerk should pay more attention to what happened, and in the future, maybe there should be some other way to look at this, that this should not happen again. I mean, we have to learn from our mistakes. City clerk should learn from the mistakes, and to have some process to stop for ever happening again, this thing to happen again. Thank you.
Well, let me ask a question, Mr. City Attorney. As we stand today, right this moment, when is the deadline for turning in the signatures,
Well,
the nominating papers?
the process that we've noticed to the public and to the candidates is through December 6th. The problem is the code identifies a nomination period, which says nomination papers can't be circulated any sooner than December 5th and no later than December 26th. So that's where the conflict is, and that's why we think it's prudent to correct the inconsistency.
But there's another conflict, too, in terms of the 21-day versus the 24-day circulation, is there not?
In my view, the primary conflict is between what the code says and the December 6th date. The December 3rd date was an attempt to have a 21-day period consistent with what our code allows. It's a 21-day period, unlike a 24-day period. But as a matter of legal challenge, I think the issue is between what our code says and the period that the county is following.
Doesn't the council have to make that decision, though? To say that this is going to be the, in terms of actions that are outside of our code, who has the authority to do that? It's only the council that has that authority to modify the code and to...
Certainly to modify the code, and I think there was an attempt to synthesize what the code requires and what the county's timeline was. And I think there was, the mistake was made in the sense that we counted 21 days, and that's what was given as a 21-day period because that's what our code says, but without the additional step of actually looking at what those dates were until it was pointed out to us.
Okay. Mr.
One more question. So then next year, or not next year, 2 years from now, we're going to go with the counties.
Right. So our code will be silent as to what the nomination period is.
24
Correct.
days in essence.
Or whatever the county says it is, yeah. So our code will be silent as to it, so we will default to the county.
Are you marking that date on your calendar, Mr.
Yeah,
Quintero?
you won't hear from me during those 24 days. I can assure you of that.
Mr. Garbettian.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with this issue. I don't know how to go about this issue. First of all, the article in News Press. Is this the one that you showed me this afternoon? Is that the one?
It's today's article.
Yeah, today's article.
By Lila Seidman.
They say that council didn't want to talk about this issue, or no one has approached me. I don't know if we approached any of you guys or not. So they didn't approach the council to ask any questions, first of all. And this is not the first time that they speak on our behalf without even contacting us. No one has called me. Otherwise, I would have told them that I was the one who brought this issue up. I was the one who discovered this mistake. I was the one who called my city manager and said, how could this be? Because our charter says your nomination period cannot start before 86 days and has to close by the 65 days before the elections. And when I did my simple math, it was based on our code, it's December 5th to December 26th. And I called, I said, how could this be? They said, let me Next thing I know, there's an urgency ordinance, and there's an article in the news press. This puts me as a council member, as a candidate, in a very compromising position. If I vote for this item, people will say, well, you wanted to shorten change the dates and shorten the time that you can pick up papers and submit your papers, because look, people can come back and say, I was out of the country for 6 months. I thought you were going to go with your code, and the nomination would have started December 5th. And I'm back. I can't even, the nomination is closed. If I don't vote for it, they would say, well, you didn't want this election to move forward. You wanted to put a wrench on that wheel. You wanted to do many other things. I don't know how to go about this issue. When I picked up my papers, I was told that the nomination period is November 12th to December 3rd. Then I look at my, by the way, my wife caught this. When we were filling out the papers to submit to the city clerk's office, my receipt says it says all nomination documents must be received in the city clerk's office no later than 5:30 p.m. on Friday, December 3rd. And Friday is not December 3rd. Friday is December 6th. And I don't know how these dates, and to just follow up on Mayor's question about the dates that is being decided, who decides those dates? Is it if the dates are being other than our code, who decides that what dates there should be? Is it the council? Is it the clerk's office? Is it the city attorney's office? Who decides those dates?
Well, certainly council has modified the dates of submitting papers before. It's happened in the 1970s, happened in the 80s, and it has modified the manner in which both however many signatures are collected as well as what's submitted. But I do want to say that, listen, no one is more regretful about where we are now in terms of what we should have caught, what we should have conferred with legal, and drafting the charter amendment and seeing where in our code there were areas where we had to clean up language than myself and my staff. But it was an oversight. We are here to try and rectify that, particularly if 2 years from now we have an election with this modification, which we have to do, because the old date, which was tied to the April elections, would not comport to our new practices. It is best to follow the California Elections Code.
No, I
In terms
understand
of
that.
who
I
decides
understand that.
That is the case. Now, in terms of the oversight, it's something that we did not catch in time, but when we did, we brought it to the attention of the city attorney's office to get clarification and to get direction and to bring it to council.
I don't know who caught what, but this thing did not. I was the one who called my city manager and told him this is what's going on. I don't know if this was caught before that or not, but as far as I know, I'm the one who caught this. But that doesn't matter. My question is not that. My question is the starting date. I want to understand it. I don't want to drag this thing out. I want to understand it because this is an important decision, despite what Mr. Moyle has to say. The starting date was with county's date, right, which was November 12th. But then the end date, the termination, the date that you have to submit, the deadline that you have, was the city's 21 days.
It was
Right?
a
So
attempt to reconcile the city's code with what we have with the county's direction, which is based on the California Elections Code.
it's very confusing. If it confuses me, believe me, it confuses everyone out there. All the candidates who are challengers and they haven't gone through this issue, this process before. This is very, very confusing. And another magic question: what happens if this ordinance doesn't pass tonight? What's going to happen? think about the worst case scenario. What would happen if this ordinance doesn't
I
pass?
mean, ultimately, we are going to have to pass this ordinance at one point or another before the next election of 2022. As far as what happens if
No,
it's not
that's
adopted tonight,
2022. I'm not
I
asking about
understand, but As
2022.
far as what will happen tonight, I would defer to the city attorney, Mr. Griffith.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As noted in the report, there's probably a couple scenarios that would result from not adopting the ordinance. So the first option would be the nomination period would close on December 6th. The city would verify the signatures and then send that information on to the county, and then the election runs. The problem, as we've identified in the report, is that because we have a code section that says our nomination period should be different, there's a potential challenge to all those signatures that were obtained before December 5th, which I imagine is the vast majority. So that's from our perspective, that's not a viable option. The other option, as we've identified, was also identified in the report, was that we would throw out any nomination papers that have been issued to date, reissue nomination papers starting December 5th. Candidates who've received signatures would have to go obtain new signatures and submit them before December 26th. At that point, we'd have to do the verification process of the signatures. It would probably be early January before our information is sent to the county. From there, the county would send out its information, but would be sending out all of the information for all the other county elections at one point, and then Glendale's information subsequent to that, given the same amount of lag time. So if we're 3 or 4 weeks behind the county, then it's presumed that all of our materials will go out 3 or 4 weeks after other county residents get their information. And the information, as we've identified, is the ballots must go out to military by no later than January 18th. That deadline would not be met. It's anticipated that the sample ballots would go out between mid-January and early February. That would not occur in Glendale. And the vote-by-mail ballots are anticipated to go out around February 1st. And that would not happen. And if you're looking at 3 or 4 weeks lag time from that date, you're looking at the end of February, early March, before, or possibly even after the election, when people are getting their vote by mail. That itself could probably trigger a challenge to the election, because those voters who are entitled to vote by mail would not have the right to do so. So from our perspective, those are two very unsatisfactory results, and is the reason why we're suggesting that, recommending, that the council introduce and adopt this ordinance.
Can we just push the election to November and go by the proper dates from the very beginning?
I don't believe so, because our charter says we have our elections on the date of the statewide primary.
But can I,
Ms. Devine?
so you said that would start, we would submit applications by December 26th, but they're pulling the names for the ballot
That's another
for the
point.
candidates on December 12th.
That's right. Just
Which means
so we're
that none of us would be qualified to be in the lottery to go on the ballot.
well, you'd be qualified. What they do? No, you would be. What they would do is they draw an alphabetical order of candidates' names to go on the ballot. And that is a good point, though. What that does, though, is that lottery occurs before candidates have to turn their papers, so candidates will know where they're going to be on the ballot before they have to submit their papers. That's not the way the system is supposed to work. We're supposed to learn that after candidates have submitted, and it's just supposed to be totally random. So that's another downside of not trying to address this through emergency legislation.
I don't know if Mr. Garpetian was finished.
No, I mean, it's, again, this is a being between a rock and a hard place. For me, personally, I don't know about my colleagues, but I'm going to ask my question one more time. Who is setting these dates?
The dates are set, from my perspective, the dates are set by state law unless there's a local law that contradicts that, because we, as a city, as a charter city, we're entitled to establish our own election dates. So that election date is currently controlled by our municipal code. And again, because there was a disconnect between what the code says and what the county was, that's where the error occurred. But normally it would be set by the county following state law. And then unless there's a contradictory local law, which in this case there is.
So in case of contradictory local law, how do we came up with these dates?
I think, I'll defer to Mr. Kasakian, but I think, as he explained.
Based on, as we stated before, based on 21 days that are required by our code we counted 21 days from the beginning of the filing date, which the county required in order to meet their deadlines, and ended up with December 3rd. And that was done in conference in the presence of staff from 3 different departments, and it was done before the papers were issued.
So if we decided to go with the county's timeline to start the process with, we don't need to change it if that was okay. So our code was changed, or our code was not put in place when we were doing the timelines. I just want to understand.
This code provision has been in place for a very long time. I don't know, you said since the 60s?
Since
Our
So at
code,
least
right?
our code provision
Yeah.
has been in place since
So
the 1960s.
when our code says 86 days before you cannot submit your papers, 86, that's why we're here, right? Because our code says
Correct.
you cannot submit your papers before 86 days from the election time.
It's 89 and 68, but yes.
I'm sorry?
It's 89.
89, I'm sorry, 89. So 89 days, our code says you cannot submit your papers or start a process before 89 days before the date of election, right?
Correct.
That's why we're here.
Correct.
So the decision to go from that date to the county's date, which is, I don't know, another month before that, was made by who?
I think it was
that
a claim
was-
was made by the city clerk's office.
That
but
was
that's-
done when we started our process to consolidate the election with the county, allowing the county to run it. The way the process works is that the county takes the place of the consultant who provides the timeline by which we have to conduct these elections. In the past, it was Martin and Chapman. They would provide us with the election calendar that comports to California Elections Code and state law. In this case, the county had calendar that also comports to state law, but the discrepancy is that there was something in our municipal code that was tied to the April odd-numbered year elections. So given if you want to have an election that is held on the statewide primary, this is the date that is the filing deadline. The county has stated that any filings, all jurisdictions will be done with their filings by December 6th.
We're going around the same circle, and I'm not getting an answer. Because, no, seriously, the decision was made to start date to be with county's timeline, and the closing date to be with city's timeline. I want to know who made that decision, because obviously it should have been, closing date should have been with the county's timeline as well. That's what we're trying to clean up here
Right,
tonight, right?
and I,
So that's what
I think-
simple question.
And I don't think it lends itself to a simple answer, Councilmember Garpetian. It's already been noted that this was an oversight. I think there was an assumption by all involved, including the folks at the county, that once we consolidated, we just follow all their rules. So all the rules would be, we start on November 12th and you end on December 6th. And nobody questioned that in light of our code, and that's where the mistake was made. But we normally, if we didn't have that code provision, and most cities don't have a code provision like that, we would consolidate with the county and we would just follow their rule. And before we consolidated, we followed the rule in the code. And so that's kind of where we're at. That's
One last question, Mr. Mayor, and I'm done. So if I didn't catch this discrepancy, what would have happened? So this election would have gone forward, and then somebody could have challenged it in a month or two?
It depends on at what point it was noticed, at what point somebody brought a challenge, and what the basis for that challenge is. I can't it'd be speculation for me to answer that, because here we are. We can address it now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The challenge would be violation of city ordinance in the conduction of an election.
But
I'll tell you what the challenge would be.
That would be the challenge, but whether that would be viable would depend on when it was caught, at what point, and who was prejudiced. So somebody would have to show that they're prejudiced again.
And by turning in papers and the city clerk saying, sorry, what are you, crazy? It's December 3rd
Yeah.
is the deadline. Mr.
A
Quintero.
question and then a comment. There are a number of other cities, I'm sure, that have the same type of situation. Have there been any issues with the other cities in LA County?
Councilmember Quintero, we have done a quick survey of cities that we know have decided to consolidate with a primary date. Glendale is somewhat unique because many of the jurisdictions in Los Angeles County consolidated to November. There were specific reasons for state primary consolidation that, as was outlined by various members sitting on the dais, as to why the city of Glendale was proposed and voters approved the state primary date. Pasadena has a primary for their city council election, and the filing deadline or the nomination period and filing deadline comports to the county's date. It is from November 12th to December 6th. We looked into their code and into their charter. Unlike ours, theirs is silent and it defers to the California Elections Code, which is what we're seeking to do with ours as well. If in the future, for instance, the state decides to move the primary date again, it will be tied to the California Elections Code and move in tandem with that.
Okay, my comment is, it was obviously a mistake, and I'd call it a big mistake. The solution is the emergency ordinance. That's going to take care of this issue at this point, and I think in the next election, there won't be an issue. Everything will conform. So I'm ready to introduce the urgency ordinance
Can I
when
make a comment?
comments are over.
Ms. Devine?
I just want to say that this oversight has resulted in as the city clerk has said, a regrettable situation, and caused a lot of angst amongst candidates, not knowing whether they were going to have to start all over or give it up or completely lose ground. And so I feel that it's time to move forward, to go ahead with this urgency ordinance, and so that we can just continue with the campaign and with the election on the right path.
One last question.
Yes, Mr. Carpet.
So we're going to the deadline of December 6th for this Friday, and this ordinance is taking place next week, right?
Correct.
Because you introduced it
Correct.
this week, takes effect next week, right? 10th,
Yes.
December 10th.
Yeah.
But isn't that kind of
So,
awkward as well? Because
well, that's
like
section-
retroactive?
Well, the ordinance includes a provision saying that's retroactive to the dates, the December 6th date, and it's essentially legalizing that date, that period that, as I mentioned, from November 12th to the December 6th date.
let's stop here because it's getting more confusing.
And if there's a revised ordinance before you, and again, what this is doing is taking out all the local rules and just defaulting to the state rules, other than requiring 100 signatures. There was also provision that in our local law that required all signatures to be submitted at the same time. By removing that, we're defaulting to the county's rule, which is they can be submitted at various times as long as they all are submitted by the deadline.
So what if someone submits something on Monday before the urgency ordinance takes effect? You can't say it's too late because it hasn't taken into effect yet. This is why this whole thing is just
Really
screwed up,
Yeah.
like terribly screwed up.
It's getting more confusing. That's why I said.
So
I
what would
need to stop
happen?
because-
What would happen if someone has papers and turns it in on Monday the 9th?
If that happened, and I don't think it will, but if it happened, what we would probably do is direct the city clerk to hold on to that application, those nomination papers, advise whichever candidate brings those in, that's past the deadline, that's been established, but that it's subject to council approval of the final ordinance. And then that's it. And if the council doesn't approve that ordinance, then we'll come back and have a discussion about when the nomination period should
But
be.
if we do approve it, if it is
Yeah. And
voted on,
Yeah, I don't believe that
there's
that's
some
unfair.
due process issues
Well, no,
there.
I don't
mean,
believe
it
that's
just-
unfair, or because people have had notice, ample notice, when from the first election notice to the notices, then we've given people information. We corrected the December 3rd date as soon as we became aware that it was not the correct date. And again, I think it is not the ideal situation, but it's the one we have. And my advice on this one is let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Like we keep saying, due process and notices and everything. I still get emails that it came to my attention that you're working on South Glendale Community Plan. That thing was approved, I don't know when. So it's not that we have all proper notices and no one is going to come back and ask for anything else. I mean, you still get emails about, I don't know, Grayson repowering. It just came to my attention that Grayson is being repowered, and we've been working on that for years. So it happens. So anyways, we are where we are.
Is this item as on the agenda properly noticed? Because this is for introduction, correct? Shouldn't it say introduction? It says an urgency ordinance as if there's going to be voting done on it.
It
I
does.
think that's improper, too. Yes, it
That's what it
is.
said. No, again, it's
It's got to be, no, I've
No, I
done
think
these
it would
before.
be, I think the reverse would be true if we were adopting it tonight and it said introduction, I think you'd have a bigger issue. But
That's why.
I don't perceive
I
it as
don't
a
know.
problem.
Mr.
That was,
Agadjian.
that was why I was saying somebody, an attorney or a person will come with creative way to negate this election. That's my understanding of this. But however, who's at fault? City manager, city attorney, city clerk? Who's at fault?
Mr. Moyle is at fault.
Well, that's a rhetorical question, I think. But Mr. City Attorney, just look at item 8E, where there's an introduction of an urgency ordinance establishing the ADU standards.
I understand. And
I think we got a notice problem here. And I know that is not what anyone wants to hear right now. But, you know, I call it like I see it, and I see that as a,
yeah. And even if there was, I mean, the correction would be to fix it, to have another meeting. We are having another meeting next week, so.
okay, so Mr. Quintero, what would you like to do?
Prepared to introduce a 1A, an urgency ordinance amending Glendale Municipal Code, Section 1.08.030, and also add, I'm going to respond to all subpoenas. The ordinance has been introduced.
With no admission of liability on the part of the city council.
Yes, sir.
I mean, we're doing this to clean something up, and it's not something that we have stepped into.
With no admission.
Okay, so let's, that was an introduction, and that concludes our business for the special meeting. Would someone
Move to adjourn?
move to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, the special meeting is adjourned, and we are going to reconvene the regular city council meeting. We left after item 3. Item 4 is now.
Item 4 is consent items, including minutes, following our routine and may be acted upon by one motion. Any member of council or audience requesting separate